you're working on this project now, where you're talking about the voice of the Gospels, or the voice of Jesus in the Gospels. Help me out and describe to me what it is you're studying right now.
Well, part of the sort of background for this thing on the details of Jesus' life is what I call understanding the voices of the gospel writers, the uniquenesses of each one. And most people, you got the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And what I don't know about you, but what I was basically taught was they're basically same outline, pretty much the same content. Then you get to John, 92% unique. See, John's really different. Well, that's not exactly right, because Matthew, Mark, and Luke are they have different emphases. They have different vocabulary. And the way I say it, Travis, is that they're interested in different things, different aspects about Jesus' life. Mark is very interested in Jesus' emotional life. And I think Mark, it's pretty standard idea that Mark is being Peter's disciple. Peter calls Mark my son, that the Gospel of Mark is basically the remembrances of Peter. Mm-hmm. And if that's true, and I think that's a good idea, I wouldn't be dogmatic about it, because the Bible doesn't just explicitly say that. And you should, quote Bill Lane here, never be dogmatic about what the Bible's not dogmatic about.
That's a good rule.
Yeah, it's a great rule. But, so you ask yourself, why is Mark interested in the emotional life of Jesus? Well, my answer is, who's on the receiving end of Jesus' emotions more than Peter? If anybody understands him being mad or frustrated, there's that passage in Mark where Jesus comes down from the mountain, and how much longer do I have to put up with you? He says. Every time I read that, I say, Jesus, that really hurts my feelings. Because I can imagine him looking at me and go, Mike, dude, how much longer do I have to put up with you? So, but you can go, Luke's interest in, Luke is Paul, he's a companion of Paul. What would you expect? What you expect is exactly what you get. You get someone who's traveling all the time. The story of Jesus in Luke is Jesus traveling. He's always on the road. 9 to 19 is just Jesus walking to Jerusalem for the last time. Well, I think that comes from Paul. He's interested in the Gentile mission. That comes from Paul, right? So, he's interested in medical details. Well, he's a doctor. That makes sense. If he's a doctor, he's probably a slave, because most doctors were slaves in the first century. Luke's very interested in marginalized people and slaves and women, people, Jesus turning the world upside down. So those are the kinds of things. And then lo and behold, you get to John. 92% unique. It's the voice of John and the vocabulary of John is very unique. So, and none of these things are complicated. This is not complicated. Most of these things I say, and people who are familiar with the gospel, so I'll go, okay, I get that. No, now I understand why. Yeah. Why that. Well, I just saw this a couple of weeks ago. John is the only gospel that tells stories of Jesus and one other person, long stories of Jesus and one other person. And once you say that, you go, Nicodemus, Joseph of Arimathea, woman at the well, all these people that have, the man born blind, that's a whole chapter on one guy. And only John does that. Matthew, Mark, Luke, they do not do that. So that's an interesting uniqueness of John. Very simple, but interesting.
I think all those details really bring it out in a phenomenal way, and it humanizes him. And I think I've been trying to figure this out. I feel like now we have gone to a place where we're focusing more on the humanization of Jesus, because we're losing touch with our humanity. And looking at the humanization, I think that's why The Chosen has been such a hit.
I do too.
He does a great job of humanizing him.
I don't think, what I think's wrong is that American Christianity is basically Pauline. Now, there's nothing wrong with Paul. That's God's word and it's perfect. Don't get me wrong. But most Christians I know a lot more about Paul than they do about Jesus. That, radical Christ-centeredness that for me came out of the Jesus movement, came from reading books like Christ the Center by Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was hung for being a Christian, right? He was murdered for being a Christian. That's just important to me. And so I think sort of helping people fall in love with the person of Jesus and being amazed by him, or whatever, the different things that happen when you get close to him. And as opposed to, I hear so many sermons on, and again, there's nothing wrong with theology, but we are called to follow this remarkable individual, and to know him. Even Paul says, I want to know Christ. So,